The wind came sharp across the big sky prairie, tasting of iron, and the promise of a storm that would kill anything caught in its teeth. Chasky reined his bay gelding to a halt on the frozen wagon track, the leather of his saddle creaking in the brittle cold. His breath misted white before his face, and the single hawk feather braided into his long black hair had gone stiff with frost, clicking faintly against the beadwork on his buckskin coat. Behind him, the plain stretched endless and pale, broken only by the dark ribbon of cottonwoods marking the river's course. Ahead, the western sky had turned the color of a fresh bruise, black and purple and livid copper, where the dying sun still clawed for purchase. Snow was coming, the kind that buried tracks and bones alike. He had been riding since dawn, checking the old buffalo wallows for bones to sell at Rain Valley. The settlers would pay good money for bone meal to enrich their exhausted fields, and Chaska needed powder and coffee before the worst of winter set in. It was hard work, solitary work, but it kept him moving between his sister's camp and the white man's towns, walking the line between two worlds that wanted nothing to do with each other. That was when he saw her. A figure stumbled through the drifts, perhaps a quarter-mile ahead, small and dark against the endless white. No horse, no wagon. Just a woman walking alone, dragging her feet through snow that reached her knees. Her skirts were dark and heavy with ice, and she moved with the lurching gait of someone who had been walking too long, too far past the point where the body should have given out. Chaske touched his heels to the bay's flanks and moved forward at an easy lope, closing the distance. As he drew nearer, details emerged from the glare of snow and failing light. The woman wore no proper coat, only a thin wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders and clutched tight across her chest. Her hair, dark blonde and matted with ice, hung in frozen strands around a face gone pale as death. Her boots, if they could still be called that, left uneven prints behind her, some of them stained dark with blood. Chaske slowed the bay to a walk and approached carefully, not wanting to spook her. When he was 20 feet away, she looked up. Her eyes were gray-wide with exhaustion and something deeper terror that had burned so long it had turned to ash. She stared at him for a long moment, swaying on her feet, and Chaske could see her trying to decide whether he was salvation or just another threat. She made the decision for him. Her legs buckled, and she went down hard on her knees in the snow. Chaske was off the bay in an instant, moving to her side. Up close, he could see the damage. Her wrists were circled with bruises, purple and yellow, days old. Her knuckles were scraped raw, and the bundle she clutched against her chest beneath the shawl it moved. A tiny mewling sound escaped it. A baby. She was carrying a baby. "I'm lost," she whispered, and her voice cracked on the second word like river ice in spring. Chaske looked into her face and saw the truth written there. This was not a woman who had wandered off a homestead by accident. This was a woman running for her life. He turned in the saddle and scanned the horizon behind her. Miles back, barely visible through the gathering haze of blowing snow, a dark line moved across the white. Riders, 4, maybe 5, coming steady, not hurrying, confident in their pursuit. Chaske looked back at the woman. She was watching him with those ash-gray eyes, waiting for judgment. He could see an oilskin parcel tucked inside her shawl beside the baby, bulging with papers tied with string. Whatever she was running from it was bad enough to risk dying in a winter storm. He made his choice in a heartbeat. He always did. Chaske leaned down from the saddle and extended his gloved hand. "Then follow me home." For a moment, she just stared at his hand, as if she had forgotten what kindness looked like. Then her fingers, blue with cold, trembling like aspen leaves, reached up and gripped his wrist. He hauled her up behind him in one smooth motion, settling her weight across the bay's rump. She gasped at the movement, clutching the baby tight and Chasky felt her fingers scrabble for purchase on his belt. He waited until she had a firm grip, then kicked the bay into a lope. The storm hit within minutes. Snow began to fall in thick, slanting curtains, driven by a wind that howled like wolves on a blood trail. The temperature plunged. Ice formed in the creases of Chasky's gloves and along the bay's mane. Behind him, the woman pressed close against his back, her body shaking so hard he could feel it through the layers of hide and wool. The baby made small, desperate sounds, thin cries, that the wind snatched away as soon as they left the tiny lungs. Chasky leaned forward over the bay's neck, urging more speed, guiding the horse by instinct and memory toward the cottonwood breaks, where his sister's winter camp lay hidden. He did not look back. The riders were out there somewhere in the white chaos, but the storm was erasing tracks as fast as the bay could make them. For now, that was enough. The woman's breath came ragged and harsh against his shoulder blade. Once he felt her grip weaken, and he reached back with one hand to steady her arm. Her fingers tightened again, holding on with a strength born of pure desperation. "Not far," he said, pitching his voice to carry over the wind. He did not know if she heard him. The world narrowed to the rhythm of the bay's hooves, so the burn of cold air in his lungs and the weight of a stranger's life pressed against his spine. Darkness came fast, as it always did in winter, swallowing the prairie whole. The snow thickened until Chasky could barely see the bay's ears, let alone the trail ahead. But he knew this country. He had been born to it, raised in it, and it would not kill him today. The cottonwoods appeared like ghosts through the storm-black shapes rising from the white, their bare branches clacking together in the wind. Chasky guided the bay along the frozen creek bed, the ice groaning beneath the horse's weight, until the dim glow of firelight appeared through the blowing snow. 3 skin lodges huddled against the cut-bank smoke rising from the center, one only to be shredded by the wind. Home. Chasky whistled 2 short notes, a meadowlark's call, and a moment later, the lodge flap was thrust aside. His sister Wynema stepped out rifle in hand, her dark eyes sharp and wary. She saw him saw the woman clinging to his back, and her expression shifted from wariness to grim understanding. She ducked back inside and reappeared without the rifle, moving quickly through the drifts to his side. Chasky dismounted and reached up to help the woman down. She tried to swing her leg over, but her muscles had locked from cold and fear. She started to fall. Chasky caught her under the arms and lifted her bodily from the saddle, holding her weight as her legs buckled beneath her. "I've got you," he said quietly. "You're safe now." She looked up at him, snowflakes clinging to her eyelashes, and for the first time since he had found her, something other than terror crossed her face. Hope, maybe, or just the desperate need to believe. Wynema took one look at the woman's bleeding feet and pale face and gestured sharply toward the lodge. "Get her inside, quickly." Together, they half-carried her through the snow and into the warmth. The heat inside the lodge hit like a fist after hours in the storm. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of cooking meat almost stifling. A small fire crackled in the center pit, and around it sat the elders of their small band, Old Man Tashunka, white-haired and bent with age, his weathered hands still deft as he carved a pipe stem. His wife Macha mending a pair of moccasins with sinew and bone needle. And Wynema's late husband's uncle, a man named Hoka, who spoke rarely but saw everything. 2 children sat near the back of the lodge, small Hawk, a boy of 10 with serious dark eyes, and Morning Rain, a girl of 8, with her hair in 2 neat braids. They had been playing a guessing game with painted pebbles, but now they watched the newcomers with wide, silent curiosity. Chasky lowered the woman onto a buffalo robe near the fire. She collapsed onto it with a sound that was half sob, half sigh, and for a moment she simply lay there, trembling. The bundle at her chest squirmed, and let out a thin, reedy wail. Winema knelt beside her and gently pried the baby from her arms. The woman's fingers resisted for a moment, clutching tight with the desperation of a mother who had nothing left but this one small life. Then she let go her hands, falling slack at her sides. Winema unwrapped the infant with practiced care. A girl Chaske saw, tiny and red-faced, perhaps 3 or 4 weeks old. The baby's skin was cold to the touch, her lips faintly blue. Winema checked her over quickly, her hands gentle but efficient, then wrapped her in a clean piece of soft hide and handed her back to her mother. "She needs warmth," Winema said, glancing at Chaske. "And food. Both of them." Chaske nodded. He stepped back outside into the storm to tend the bay, stripping the saddle and rubbing the horse down with handfuls of dry grass before tying him in the lee of a crude shelter where the other horses stood huddled together, their rumps to the wind. Then he made a circuit of the camp perimeter, rifle in hand, checking for tracks. The snow was falling too hard to see more than a few yards, and any tracks the woman had left were already buried. Good. That bought them time. But not much. Those riders were not fools. They would wait out the worst of the storm, then come hunting. Back inside, Chaske found the woman sitting upright, sipping broth from a wooden cup that Macha had pressed into her hands. She drank in small, trembling sips, wincing as the hot liquid touched her cracked lips. Winema had pulled off the woman's ruined boots, the soles split open the leather, stiff with ice and blood, and was wrapping her feet in strips of soft rabbit fur. The woman's toes were white with frostbite, the heels raw and oozing. It was a miracle she had been able to walk at all. Chaske sat down across the fire from her, setting his rifle within easy reach. The woman looked up and met his eyes. Up close in the firelight, she looked even younger than he had first thought, perhaps 22, maybe younger. Her face was gaunt with exhaustion, cheekbones sharp, but there was something in the set of her jaw that spoke of steel beneath the fragility. "Thank you," she said, voice hoarse and raw. "You saved our lives." Chaske inclined his head slightly. "Who's following you?" She flinched as if he had struck her. Her fingers tightened around the cup, and for a moment he thought she would not answer. Then she set the cup down carefully and looked at him with those gray eyes gone hard as winter's stone. "My husband's brother," she said. "Francis Connolly and his men." Chaske waited, letting the silence stretch. Around the fire, the others had gone quiet, listening. The woman took a shaky breath. "My name is Eliza. Eliza Connolly. My husband was Jack. He worked a mining claim near Claybank, not a big operation, just him and Francis at first. Then Jack struck a good seam, started pulling out decent ore enough to ship regular to the buyer in Goldwater. We were doing well enough to hire a few men, buy better equipment." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "Francis wanted a bigger share. Said he deserved it since he'd been there from the start. Jack refused. They fought about it." She paused, her face going pale. 3 weeks ago, I was at the cooperage bringing Jack his dinner. I heard shouting Jack's voice, Francis's voice, and another man I didn't recognize at first. I hid behind a stack of barrels and watched through a gap in the boards. Her hands began to shake. I saw Jack arguing with Francis and Sheriff Marcus Davenport. Jack was holding papers, his ledger, I think. He was shouting about theft, about fraud. Francis tried to grab the papers. Jack shoved him back, and then... She swallowed hard. Davenport hit Jack from behind with something heavy. A mallet, maybe. Jack went down. He didn't get back up. Tears slid down her cheeks. I saw them roll him into a barrel. I heard Davenport say, "Make it look like an accident. Roll it off the loading dock. No one will question it." And Francis laughed. He actually laughed and said, "What about the woman?" Davenport said, "We'll deal with her after. one problem at a time. Chaske felt cold fury settle in his gut. You saw them kill him? Yes. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. I stayed hidden until they left. Then I ran home, grabbed what I could, and searched for the papers Jack had hidden. I found the ledger, a telegraph receipt, and a Cooper's tally that proves the barrel was overweight. I took my baby and ran. Francis came to the house the next morning. When I wasn't there, he sent men after me. She touched the bruises on her wrist. One of them caught up to me 2 days ago. He tried to take Anna. I fought him off with a rock and ran again. I've been walking ever since. Winnemaw's hands stilled on Eliza's feet. Across the fire, old man Tashunka set down his pipe stem, his lined face grave. Eliza reached inside her coat with trembling fingers and pulled out the oilskin parcel. She untied the string and spread the contents across her lap: a small ledger, some loose papers, a folded telegraph receipt. This is everything Jack gathered, she said quietly. Proof that Francis and Davenport were stealing from the claim. Proof they killed him to cover it up. Chaske leaned forward and studied the documents. The ledger showed discrepancies in ore shipments. The telegraph receipt had Davenport's signature authorizing transfers to account ledger entry bank account number of Munner at the local bank. The Cooper's tally noted an overweight barrel with Connolly written in pencil. This could hang them both? Winnemaw said softly. That's what I'm hoping, Eliza said. But first, I have to get it to someone who'll act on it. The marshal in Goldwater, maybe. They had been patrolling near the junction after receiving a partial relay the previous afternoon, making their swift arrival plausible. He doesn't answer to Davenport. Chaske sat back processing. This was more than a fleeing widow. This was murder, fraud, a corrupt lawman and a greedy brother and a woman with a baby, and evidence that could bring them both down. He looked at Winnemaw. She met his eyes and gave a small nod. They did not need words. This woman and her child were under their protection now. Chaske turned back to Eliza. If men are coming, we'll need dry wood and ground higher than their guns. Eliza stared at him, something like hope flickering in her exhausted face. You'll help me. You're here, Chaske said simply. That means you're ours to protect. A sob caught in Eliza's throat. She pressed a hand to her mouth, shoulders shaking, and for a moment the steel cracked, and he saw the terrified young widow beneath, holding on by her fingernails. Winnemaw reached out and took Eliza's hand, squeezing gently. You're safe here. Rest while you can. Eliza nodded, unable to speak. She curled onto her side on the buffalo robe, the baby Anna she had whispered the name earlier, tucked against her chest. Chaske stood and pulled his heavy buffalo robe from his pack, draping it over both of them without comment. Eliza looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and shining. She started to lift her hand as if to thank him, then hesitated and pulled it back, shy and uncertain, in the presence of strangers who had shown her more kindness in an hour than she had seen in weeks. Chaske gently folded her fingers into a warmer corner of the robe, his touch brief and careful. Sleep, he said quietly. I'll keep watch. She nodded, and within minutes her breathing had slowed and deepened. The baby's tiny fist curled against her mother's collarbone, and she too slept safe for the first time since the world had turned against them. Chaske moved to the lodge flap and peered out into the storm. The snow showed no sign of stopping. Good. That bought them time. But come morning, or whenever the storm broke, those riders would come, and they would not stop until they found her. He settled near the fire rifle across his knees. Winnemaw sat beside him close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "They'll come," she said softly. "I know. We'll be ready." Chaske glanced at the children asleep now in their blankets, oblivious to the danger gathering outside. He thought of the riders out there in the storm, cold and angry and relentless. He thought of the ledger and what it meant, murder-corruption men who would kill to keep their secrets buried. "We'll be ready," he agreed. But deep down, he knew ready might not be enough. The storm raged through the night. By dawn, the wind had dropped to a low, bitter moan, and the snow fell in thick, lazy curtains. Chaske had not slept. He had spent the dark hours moving between the lodge and the perimeter, checking sight lines, counting ammunition. He had 14 rounds for the Winchester, and Winema had 6 for her rifle. 20 bullets between them, enough if they were careful and lucky. Inside the lodge, Eliza woke stiff and aching. Matcha fed her more broth and a handful of pemmican dried meat pounded with fat and berries, and showed her how to tuck the baby inside her shawl to keep the child's warmth close to her body. Anna fussed briefly, then settled her tiny fingers kneading the wool like a kitten. Old man Tashunka sat near the fire, packing tobacco into his pipe, and watching the door with the stillness of a man who had seen many winters and expected to see fewer ahead. Matcha and Hoka were outside tending the horses, murmuring to the animals in low, soothing voices. An hour passed. The snow began to thin. Visibility stretched to 30 yards, then 50. Chaske stood outside the lodge, scanning the tree line along the frozen creek. Nothing. No movement. No sound but the wind in the cottonwoods. He turned to go back inside, a rifle cracked from the willows downstream. The bullet hit a cottonwood trunk 10 feet from Chaske's head, blowing splinters into the air with a sharp crack. He dropped flat, rolling behind the nearest tree, and brought the Winchester up in one fluid motion. "Inside," he shouted. Winema burst from the lodge rifle already in her hands, and grabbed Small Hawk and Morning Rain by their collars, dragging them back through the flap. Eliza scrambled after them, one arm wrapped around Anna, the other clutching the oilskin parcel. Old man Tashunka snatched up his bow and quiver, ancient weapons, but quiet, and crouched beside the lodge entrance, his old eyes sharp and calm. Another shot. This one punched through the top of the center lodge, tearing the hide with a wet, ripping sound. Smoke from the fire billowed out through the hole, whipped away by the wind. Chaske counted muzzle flashes. 3 rifles, maybe 4, spread out along the willow thicket about 80 yards downstream. They were using the cover well, not exposing themselves. Smart. They were not charging in blind. They were pinning the camp down, waiting for someone to panic. He shifted position behind the tree and fired twice controlled, deliberate shots into the willows. He did not expect to hit anything, but he needed to make them cautious. One of the rifles went silent. The others pulled back slightly, regrouping. Through the drifting snow, Chaske caught a glimpse of a rider sitting his horse at the edge of the willows. The man wore a red wool scarf and sat straight in the saddle, arrogant and confident. "Francis Connolly." A voice shouted from the trees, harsh and nasal. "Turn out the woman and no one catches hell fire." Chaske recognized the voice. Brave Ben, one of Davenport's deputies, a man who wore the sheriff's star when Davenport did not want to dirty his hands. The miners called him Brave Ben as a bitter joke. The man had never shown courage in his life, only cruelty backed by a badge. Chaske did not answer. He reloaded calmly, ejecting the spent shells into the snow. Another shot. This one hit the lean-to where the horses were tied, splintering a support post. One of the horses screamed and reared, snapping its tie rope. The bay bolted into the storm hooves, churning snow, and disappeared within seconds. Winema fired back from the lodge entrance, her shot close enough to make the deputy duck behind a tree. She pulled back inside and turned to Chaske. "We can't hold them here. Too much open ground. If they circle us, we're finished." Chaske knew she was right. The camp was defensible for a few minutes, maybe less. If the riders brought up more men or simply waited them out, they would be overrun or starved out. "We move," he said. "Upriver." The cutbank trailed a timber fork. Winema's eyes widened. "The river ice is better than staying here." She hesitated, then nodded grimly. "I'll get the elders." Chasky crawled back to the lodge on his belly. Inside, Eliza crouched with the baby pressed to her chest, her face pale but composed. The children clung to Matcha, silent and wide-eyed. "We're leaving," Chasky said. "Now, follow close and stay low." Eliza swallowed hard, then nodded. "Where?" "Higher ground. Can you walk?" He saw her glance down at her feet, wrapped in rabbit fur that was already soaked through with melted snow and fresh blood. She met his eyes again. Yes. He believed her. There was steel in that gaze, forged by loss and desperation. Wainema hauled out a pack with what little they had dried meat, a fire kit, a water skin. Hoka started to grab the lodge poles to drag them. Chasky shook his head. "No time. Leave them." They slipped out the back of the lodge one by one, using the dense cottonwoods for cover. The shooting continued at the front. Brave Ben and his men had not yet realized the camp was emptying. Chasky led them along the frozen creek bed, moving as fast as the snow and their exhaustion allowed. Eliza stumbled twice, biting back cries of pain, but she kept moving. Winema walked beside her, one hand steadying her elbow. The children followed Old Man Tashunka, who moved with surprising speed for his years. Matcha and Hoka brought up the rear rifles ready. They had covered perhaps 200 yards when a shout went up behind them. One of the riders had swung wide and spotted their retreat. "Run!" Chasky barked. They broke into a ragged sprint, slipping on ice, crashing through drifts. The creek curved ahead, the banks steeper here, the ice thicker and groaning with cold. Chasky led them onto it, praying it would hold. It did. Barely. The surface groaned and cracked under their weight, spiderweb fractures spreading from their footsteps, but it held. Behind them, hoofbeats, shouting. Francis's voice sharp with fury. After them, don't let them reach the bluff. A rifle shot echoed across the ice. Their packhorse, an old mare Hoka had been leading, dropped with a scream, legs thrashing. The supplies she carried tumbled across the ice and slid into a dark hole where the current ran fast beneath the surface. Food blankets, precious ammunition, gone in seconds. Chasky did not stop. He pulled Eliza along his hand, gripping her arm just above the elbow. She was gasping now, each breath a ragged sob, but she did not slow. The baby wailed a thin sound, swallowed by wind. Ahead, the cutbank loomed a steep rocky climb, up to the old rail grade that ran along the plateau. It was their only chance. They reached the base of the bluff as the first riders broke through the willows onto the ice. Chasky turned, dropped to one knee, and fired. The lead horse reared, and its rider cursed, yanking hard on the reins. The others pulled up suddenly, wary. "Climb!" Chasky shouted. Winema went first, hauling herself up the rocks with Small Hawk clinging to her back. The girl whimpered, but stayed still. They made it to the top without incident. Small Hawk followed, moving with careful grace. Then the elders, one by one. Chasky gestured for Eliza to go. She stepped to the base of the cliff and looked up at the sheer rock face, 30 feet of ice-slicked stone. Her face went white. "I can't," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Chasky stepped beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. "Look at me. Not down. Just me." Eliza turned her head slowly and met his eyes. He held her gaze steady and calm as deep water and started climbing. She followed, one hand gripping the rock and the other arm cradling Anna inside the shawl. The climb was brutal. The rocks were slick with ice, and every handhold felt like it might give way. Eliza's feet slipped repeatedly, her boots useless, and she had to pull herself up with sheer arm strength. Blood from her torn feet smeared the rocks, freezing almost instantly into dark streaks. Halfway up, her foot slipped out from under her. She swung out over empty air, one hand clinging to a crack in the rock and the baby's weight dragging her down. She bit her lips so hard, it split, tasting copper, her vision narrowing to a pinpoint of terror. Chaske lunged, grabbed her wrist with both hands, and hauled her up with a grunt of effort. Their faces were inches apart, breath mingling in clouds of steam, eyes locked. "I've got you," he said, his voice low and steady as stone. "Don't let go." She nodded, unable to speak, and he pulled her over the edge onto the rail grade with one final heave. Winema grabbed the baby, checking her over quickly. Still breathing, still whole. They scrambled into the cover of a dense spruce thicket as bullets chipped the rock below. The riders were attempting the climb, now slower and more cautious. Chaske counted heads. Everyone had made it. But they were undersupplied, exhausted, and hunted. Night was coming fast, and the temperature was already dropping towards something lethal. He looked at Eliza, saw the pain carved into every line of her face, the blood soaking through the rabbit fur on her feet, and felt something shift inside him. Not pity, but something harder. A resolve that tasted like iron and blood. "We keep moving," he said quietly. "Stay close to me." Eliza nodded, her gray eyes meeting his, with a trust that felt almost unbearable. They disappeared into the trees as the storm gathered strength again. And behind them, the riders cursed and climbed relentless as wolves on a blood trail. The rail grade stretched east through stands of lodgepole pine and granite outcrops, a narrow corridor carved by long-dead lumbermen. Snow lay thick and undisturbed on the old tracks, and Chaske broke trail at the front, his legs burning with the effort of plowing through drifts that reached mid-thigh. Eliza walked behind him, one hand gripping the shoulder of his coat to steady herself. Every step sent fresh agony through her ruined feet, but she swallowed the pain and kept moving, kept following the broad back of the man who had become her anchor in this frozen nightmare. The cold was a living thing now, pressing in from all sides. Eliza's fingers inside her gloves had gone numb, and she could no longer feel Anna's weight in her arms, only see the small bundle pressed against her chest, only pray the child was still breathing. Her stomach cramped with hunger. They had eaten the last of the pemmican an hour ago, and there was nothing left. Behind them, Winema herded the children. Small Hawk was stoic, his young face set in grim determination. But Morning Rain whimpered softly with each step, her legs too short to keep pace. Winema ended up carrying her on her back arms, hooked under the child's knees, her own legs trembling with exhaustion. Old Man Tashunka and Hoka brought up the rear, moving slowly to conserve strength. Macha walked between them, head bowed against the wind, her breath coming in harsh, labored gasps that Chaske could hear even from the front of the line. They walked for hours as the day died around them. The sky darkened from gray to charcoal to black, and still they walked. Chaske's lungs burned. His vision blurred at the edges. But he did not stop. Just when he thought they could go no farther, the rail grade opened onto a small clearing where a massive fallen pine lay across the tracks. Beneath its sprawling root system was a hollow, not quite a cave, but shelter from the wind. "Here," Chaske said, his voice hoarse. "We rest." They crowded into the hollow, pressing close together for warmth. Chaske and Hoka used their knives to cut branches from nearby spruce trees, weaving them into a crude screen to block the opening. It was not much, but it would keep the worst of the wind out. Winema built a tiny fire in the hollow's deepest recess, using the last of their fire kit. The flames were small, barely enough to warm their hands, but the psychological comfort was immense. Eliza sat with her back against the root wall, the baby cradled in her lap. Anna had stopped crying hours ago, a bad sign. Eliza unwrapped the shawl with numb fingers and pressed her ear to the tiny chest. The heartbeat was there, faint and rapid, but there. Chaske knelt beside her. "Let me see." Eliza unwrapped Anna fully. The baby's skin was pale, almost translucent, her lips tinged blue. Ice crystals had formed in the linen around her mouth. Chaske felt the cold knot of dread tighten in his chest. He had seen this before, hypothermia in infants. If they did not warm the child soon, she would slip away without ever waking. He stripped off his gloves and pressed his bare palms against Anna's tiny chest, transferring what little warmth he had. Then he took off his outer coat and wrapped it around Eliza and the baby together, cocooning them in layers of hide and wool. "Hold her against your skin," he said. "Your body heat is all we have right now." Eliza obeyed without question, tucking Anna inside her dress against her bare ribs. The baby stirred weakly and let out a thin cry. Good. Crying meant life. Chaske turned to Winema. "Water." She shook her head. "We lost the skin in the creek." Chaske swore under his breath. He grabbed a tin cup from the pack and filled it with clean snow, then warmed it between his palms, waiting for the snow to melt. It took agonizing minutes. When he finally had half a cup of cold water, he added a pinch of willow bark shavings from a pouch at his belt, good for pain and fever, and held the cup over the tiny fire, warming it slowly. When the water was barely above freezing, he handed it to Eliza. "Small sips. You first, then her." Eliza drank hands, shaking so hard she nearly spilled it. Then she dipped a corner of her shawl into the cup and let the baby suckle the damp fabric. Anna's mouth worked weakly, drawing in the moisture, and after a moment, her color improved just a fraction. Eliza looked up at Chaske, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. I don't know how—" "Don't thank me yet," Chaske said quietly. "We're not through this." He moved to the opening of the hollow and peered out. The storm had worsened. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, and the wind screamed through the trees like a banshee. Visibility was zero. He turned back to the group. "We stay here tonight. No choice. But we leave at first light storm or no storm." Everyone nodded, too exhausted to speak. Chaske sat beside Eliza, his shoulder touching hers. She leaned into him slightly, seeking warmth, and he did not pull away. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the fire flicker and listening to the storm rage outside. "Tell me about him," Chaske said finally. "Your husband." Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Jack was kind, careful with numbers, careful with people. He believed in doing things right, even when it was hard. He saw what Francis and Davenport were doing, and he couldn't let it stand." Her voice cracked. It got him killed. "He sounds like a good man." He was. Tears slid down her cheeks. "And I miss him every moment. But I can't stop moving, can't stop running. Because if I do, they'll take Anna, and everything Jack tried to protect will be for nothing." Chaske reached out slowly and placed his hand over hers where it rested on the baby. "We'll get the proof to people who can use it. I promise you that." Eliza looked at him, her gray eyes searching his face. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You owe me nothing." "Because it's right," Chaske said simply, "and because no one should have to run alone." She held his gaze, and something shifted in her eyes, a crumbling of the last wall she had built around herself. "If I fall," she said quietly, "you take the baby to Winema. Promise me." "Blast it, Eliza." Chaske said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Don't talk about falling. Promise me." He met her eyes, saw the fierce determination there, and nodded slowly. "I promise, but you're not going to fall." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're stronger than you know," he said. "And because I won't let you." The words hung between them, more vow than statement. Eliza's fingers curled around his, holding tight. She pulled out the oilskin parcel and spread the contents across her lap once more. The ledger, the receipt, the tally. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I didn't just hear about what happened to Jack. I saw it." Chaske leaned closer, his full attention on her now. "I was bringing Jack his dinner that day." Eliza continued, her voice low and haunted. "I heard shouting coming from inside the cooperage. Jack's voice, Francis's voice, and another man, Davenport, though I didn't know it then. I hid behind a stack of barrels and watched through a gap in the boards." Her hands began to shake. "I saw Jack holding these papers, shouting about theft and fraud. Francis tried to grab them. Jack shoved him back. And then Davenport hit Jack from behind with a cooper's mallet. Jack went down. He didn't get back up." Chaske felt cold fury settle in his gut. "I watched them roll him into that barrel," Eliza said, her voice breaking. "I heard Davenport say, 'Make it look like an accident. Roll it off the loading dock. No one will question it.' And Francis laughed and asked, 'What about the woman?' Davenport said, 'We'll deal with her after. One problem at a time.'" "You're not just carrying evidence," Chaske said slowly. "You're a witness." "Yes. That's why they have to kill me. The ledger and the receipt might be explained away, but not my testimony. Not what I saw with my own eyes." She looked at him. "If we get to Goldwater, if I can testify to the marshal, they'll hang for murder." They had been patrolling near the junction after receiving a partial relay the previous afternoon, making their swift arrival plausible. Chaske understood now why the pursuit had been so relentless. This was not just about covering up fraud. This was about silencing the only person who could put a noose around their necks. He took her hand again, his grip warm and steady. "Then we make sure you live long enough to tell your story." "Together," she whispered. "Together," he agreed. Outside, the storm howled. Inside the hollow, pressed close together for warmth, they waited for dawn. They set out at first light, though light was a generous term. The sky was a uniform gray, the storm unrelenting. They walked in single file, heads down, following the rail grade east. By midday, they reached a place where the grade crossed a narrow ravine on an old trestle bridge. The structure was ancient, the boards rotted and gap-toothed, some missing entirely. Below, jagged rocks jutted up through the snow 30 feet down. Chaske tested the first plank with his weight. It groaned alarmingly, but held. "One at a time," he said. Slow and careful. Wynema went first, carrying Morning Rain on her back. The boards creaked and shifted underfoot, but they made it across. Small Hawk followed, moving with the careful grace of someone who had crossed worse. Old Man Tashunka started across next. Halfway over, one of the boards beneath his foot gave way with a sharp crack. He stumbled, arms windmilling, and for a heart-stopping moment it looked like he would fall. Hoka lunged forward and grabbed the old man's arm, hauling him back to solid footing. They stood there for a moment, breathing hard, then continued across more carefully. Macha followed, then Hoka. Chaske gestured for Eliza to go. She stepped onto the bridge and immediately looked down through the gaps at the rocks below. Her face went white as snow. "I can't," she whispered, frozen in place. Chaske stepped onto the bridge beside her, so close their shoulders touched. "Eliza, look at me." She tore her eyes away from the abyss and met his gaze. "Just look at me," he said calmly. "Match my steps. Don't think about anything else." He took a step forward. She matched him. Another step. Another. The boards groaned and shifted, gaps yawning beneath their feet. But Chaska's presence was an anchor, solid and unshakable. They moved together, step by careful step, eyes locked on each other until they reached the far side. Eliza let out a shaky breath, her legs nearly buckling with relief. "See," Chaska said quietly. "You're steadier than you think." She looked at him, something unspoken passing between them. Gratitude, trust, something deeper. And for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them standing together in the cold. Then they moved on. An hour later, exhaustion and hunger were taking their toll. Morning rain was crying openly now, and Small Hawk stumbled every few steps. Macha's breathing had turned wheezy and labored. Then Chaski spotted something ahead, a dark shape against the white. As they drew closer, he recognized it, a small cave in a rocky hillside, its entrance partially obscured by snow-laden pines. "Shelter," he said, relief flooding through him. "Come on." They trudged toward the cave, hope lending them a burst of energy. Chaske entered first, rifle ready, checking for danger. The cave was perhaps 15 feet deep, dry, with a flat floor. Perfect. But as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Fresh scat in the back corner, large, and the unmistakable musky smell of bear. "Out," he said sharply. "Now, there's a..." A roar split the air. From the back of the cave, a massive grizzly bear surged forward, enraged at finding intruders in its winter den. Chaska fired his rifle. The shot went wide in his haste, ricocheting off the cave wall. The bear kept coming, 1,000 pounds of fur and fury. Chaska threw himself backward, colliding with Eliza and knocking her out of the cave entrance. The bear followed, bursting into the daylight with another deafening roar. Winema fired her rifle. The shot hit the bear in the shoulder, not enough to stop it, but enough to make it turn toward her. The bear charged. Chaske rolled to his feet and fired again, this time hitting the bear in the chest. It stumbled, but kept coming. Hoka fired. Another hit. The bear slowed, blood staining the snow, but it was still on its feet, still dangerous. Chaske stepped in front of Eliza, and the children rifle leveled and fired one more time. The shot took the bear in the head. It dropped like a felled tree, skidding to a stop 5 feet from where they stood. Silence. Everyone stood, frozen hearts pounding, staring at the massive corpse. "Is everyone all right?" Chaske asked, his voice tight. Nods all around. Somehow, miraculously, no one had been hurt. Chaske checked the bear to make sure it was dead, then turned to the group. "We can't stay here. More predators will smell the blood. We move." They left the cave behind, the adrenaline fading and leaving them even more exhausted than before. But an hour later, they stumbled into a narrow valley where a handful of sod-roofed buildings crouched against the wind. A weathered sign, half buried in snow, read, "Dry River, population 12. Chaske knew this place, knew the man who lived in the largest building, a homesteader named Jasper Lowe, a man of 50, with more kindness than sense. Jasper owed Chaske a debt from the spring before, when Chaske had pulled Jasper's son from a flash flood on the Sweetwater. They approached cautiously. Smoke rose from Jasper's chimney. Chaske knocked on the door, rifle ready. The door cracked open. Jasper's weathered face appeared, eyes widening. "By thunder, Chaske. What in blazes? Need shelter," Chaske said tersely. "And help." Jasper looked past him at the group, and the woman, the baby, the children, the elders, all of them half frozen and desperate. His jaw tightened. "They after you?" "Yes." Jasper stepped back, opening the door wide. "Get inside, quickly." They crowded into the small sod house. It smelled of damp wool and onions and wood smoke. A thin stew bubbled on the stove. Barbed wire spools leaned against one wall, evidence of Jasper's small rebellion against the big cattle outfits that kept cutting his fences. Jasper's wife Cora, a worn woman with gentle hands, took one look at Eliza and the baby and ushered them to a chair by the fire. She checked Eliza's feet with soft clucking sounds, then began cleaning the wounds with warm water and lye soap. Chasky stood by the window, rifle in hand, watching the road. An hour passed, then 2. They ate the watery stew hot and filling, and that was enough. Just before midnight, horses appeared. 4 riders moving slow and deliberate. Francis Connolly was not among them, but the lead rider wore a tin star on his vest. Brave Ben. Jasper grabbed his shotgun, an old double-barrel, rust-pitted but functional. Chasky stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Let me." "My house," Jasper said firmly. "My fight." He stepped onto the threshold as the riders reined up. Brave Ben leaned forward in the saddle, smiling without warmth. "Evening, Jasper. We're looking for a woman, young with a baby. You seen her?" Jasper leveled the shotgun at Ben's chest, both hammers cocked. "Nope." Ben's smile faded. "Don't be stupid, old man. We know she's here. Turn her out." "Get off my land," Jasper said evenly. Ben's hand moved toward his holster. Jasper's finger tightened on the trigger. Then Ben's horse shifted, and Ben's boot caught on the stirrup. He cursed, losing his balance for a moment. Jasper took advantage, stepping forward and shoving the barrel of the shotgun into Ben's chest, hard enough to knock him back in the saddle. "I said get off my land." Jasper repeated, his voice hard as iron. One of the other riders started to draw his pistol. Chasky appeared in the doorway, Winchester leveled, and fired a shot into the ground at the horse's feet. The animal reared, throwing its rider into the snow. The remaining riders yanked their reins horses, dancing nervously. Ben, regaining his composure, spat into the snow. "You'll regret this, Jasper. Mark my words." "Likely so," Jasper said calmly. "But not tonight." The riders wheeled their horses and disappeared into the darkness. Jasper lowered the shotgun, his hands trembling slightly. Back inside, Chasky stood by the window, watching to make sure they were really gone. Jasper came to stand beside him. "They'll be back," Jasper said quietly, "with more men." "I know," Chasky said. "We'll leave before dawn." Jasper nodded. He went to where Eliza sat and gently checked the bandages Cora had applied to her feet. "You're strong, ma'am. Keep that baby warm." He turned to Chasky and pressed a small tin of bear grease and a coil of telegraph repair wire into his hands. "For whatever comes next, the wire might help you splice into a line if you find one." Chasky took the items. "Thank you, Jasper." Jasper clapped him on the shoulder. "You saved my boy last spring. This doesn't even come close to making us square." That night, Eliza rose from the chair and moved to where Chasky sat keeping watch. She carried strips of cloth Cora had given her and knelt beside him. "Let me check your arm," she said quietly. During the fight with the bear, Chasky had scraped his forearm badly on a rock. He had wrapped it hastily with a piece of his shirt, but blood had soaked through. Chasky started to protest, then nodded and held out his arm. Eliza unwrapped the makeshift bandage and cleaned the wound with water, warmed by the fire, her touch careful and steady. Then she sliced a clean strip from the hem of her already tattered dress and wrapped his arm securely. Her fingers brushed the inside of his wrist as she tied off the knot, and his breath caught for just a moment. She looked up, their faces close in the firelight. "You've saved us more times than I can count," she said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." "You keep walking," Chasky said, his voice low and rough. "You keep fighting. That's thanks enough." She held his gaze for a long moment, something passing between them that neither could name trust, yes, but also something deeper, something that frightened them both with its intensity. "Together," she whispered. "Together," he agreed. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, something fragile and fierce was growing between them, rooted in blood and cold and shared survival. They left Jasper's homestead 3 hours before dawn, slipping out through the root cellar's rear exit. Cora pressed a small cloth bundle into Eliza's hands, bread, dried apples, a tin of lard. "For the baby," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Eliza hugged her fiercely. Then they were gone, shadows melting into the darkness. Chasky led them northeast now, away from the rail grade, cutting through heavy timber, where their tracks would be harder to follow. By noon, they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a frozen lake. Eliza sat slightly apart, nursing Anna beneath her shawl. The baby was responding better now, eating more, her color healthier. Eliza looked up as Chasky approached and sat beside her. "She's getting stronger," Eliza said with a tired smile. "Good," Chasky said. He paused, then added, "You are too." Eliza gave a short laugh. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm held together with string and stubbornness." "That's what strength looks like," Chasky said. "Real strength. Not giving up when everything says you should." She looked at him, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "I couldn't do this without you." "Yes, you could," Chasky said. "But you don't have to." She reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. They sat like that for a long time, saying nothing, the simple human contact, more important than words. Finally, Eliza pulled out the oilskin parcel and opened it one more time. "If we can reach the rail junction, there should be a telegraph office. We can send a message to the marshal in Goldwater." They had been patrolling near the junction after receiving a partial relay the previous afternoon, making their swift arrival plausible. "Tell him everything." "How far?" Winema asked, having moved closer to listen. "Maybe 10 miles, Chasky said. "Across open ground. We'll have to move at night to avoid being seen." Winema nodded grimly. "Then we rest here until dark." They crossed the benchland that night, a brutal 5-mile slog through thigh-deep snow with no shelter and a wind that cut like knives. Halfway across, the children began to falter. Morning rain wept openly, and Small Hawk's legs finally gave out. Chasky scooped the boy up and carried him, his own legs trembling with exhaustion. When they finally reached the rail junction just after midnight, Chasky's heart sank. The small cluster of buildings was dark, no smoke, no lights. The door to the telegraph shack hung open, banging rhythmically in the wind. They approached cautiously. Inside was chaos. Papers scattered, the telegraph set, smashed beyond repair, wires torn from the walls. And in the center of the floor, a fire pit with ashes still warm. Someone had been here within the last day. Someone who had deliberately destroyed their only means of communication. "They knew we were coming," Winema said grimly. Chasky's jaw tightened. Davenport must have sent men ahead to cut us off. "What do we do now?" Eliza asked, despair creeping into her voice. Hoka examined the walls. "The wire is still strung outside. If we can splice into it farther down the line, we might still send a message." Chasky pulled out Jasper's repair wire. "There's a maintenance shed on the north rail grade, about 3 miles. The line runs through there." "We split up," Winema said suddenly. "I'll take the children and the elders to Dry River, find Dr. Hale. He can help. You two go to the shed and send the message." Chasky started to protest, but Winema cut him off. "You're the one who knows the country. She's the one with the proof. You two have the best chance." Chasky looked at Eliza. She met his eyes and nodded. "Let's finish this." They parted ways, Wynema leading the children and elders south toward Dry River, Chaske and Eliza turning north toward the rail grade. As they walked away, Eliza heard hoofbeats in the distance. She looked back and saw torches appearing through the storm, many of them surrounding the junction. They had been minutes from capture. She turned and followed Chaske into the darkness, her heart pounding. But they had not gone unnoticed. As they climbed the rail grade toward the maintenance shed, Chaske heard pursuit behind them, closer now, more urgent. The riders had found their tracks. "Run," he said. They ran, slipping and stumbling through the snow. The shed appeared ahead, a dark shape against the white. The door was chained. Chaske smashed the lock with his rifle butt, and they tumbled inside. A workbench, tools, wire spools, and there a telegraph set, old but intact. Chaske moved to it, immediately checking connections. It might work, if the line is live. Eliza set Anna down in a corner, wrapped tight in blankets, then joined Chaske at the bench. "Tell me what to do." He began threading Jasper's repair wire through the terminals. "You know Morse code. Jack taught me some." "That'll have to be enough." Outside, hoofbeats, shouting. They were here. Chaske grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. 6 riders dismounting, spreading out around the shed. And in the center, torch held high, was Francis Connolly, his shoulder bandaged where Chaske's bullet had hit him days before. "Hand her over," Francis shouted. "Hand over the woman and the brat, and maybe you'll live." Chaske fired through the window. The shot drove the men back. He turned to Eliza. "Send the message. Now." Eliza's hands trembled over the key. She closed her eyes, reaching for the memory of Jack's patient voice teaching her. Then she began to tap. "To U.S. Marshal Goldwater." A gunshot shattered the window. Glass exploded inward. Chaske threw himself over Eliza, shielding her with his body. More shots. The door burst open. Francis charged in, pistol raised. Chaske swung his rifle and fired. The shot caught Francis high in the chest, spinning him backward out the door. 2 more men rushed in. Chaske fired again. One dropped. The other dove for cover behind the workbench. Eliza kept tapping, sweat beading on her forehead. Evidence of murder and fraud. Sheriff complicit, more gunfire. From outside, a new sound, rifles firing from a different direction. Dr. Hale's voice, "Federal law, drop your weapons." Wynema had reached Hale and brought help. The man behind the workbench fired wildly at the new threat. Eliza grabbed Francis's fallen pistol from the floor where it had skidded, and hands shaking, shot the man in the leg. He went down screaming. She turned back to the telegraph, tears streaming down her face, and kept tapping. Names to follow, send men under seal. A bullet hit the telegraph key. The spring flew across the room. Chaske retrieved it while Eliza spliced the repair wire with trembling hands, her fingers moving on muscle memory from watching Jack repair equipment months ago. Outside, the battle raged. Then came the sound Chaske had dreaded, more hoofbeats. Heavy. Fast. Sheriff Marcus Davenport arrived with reinforcements, at least 6 more armed men. His voice boomed, "Burn them out." He raised his torch toward the shed. Eliza finished the splice and tapped frantically. "Children in danger, Zen, quickly." A bullet hit the oil lamp. Flames bloomed across the floor. "Out!" Chaske shouted. Eliza grabbed Anna and dove through the door. Chaske followed. The shed exploded in flames behind them, smoke billowing into the storm. Davenport wheeled his horse, aiming his pistol at Eliza where she lay in the snow. Chaske saw it happening, as if in slow motion. He threw himself between them. The shot took him in the left shoulder, high and brutal. He went down, hard blood spraying the snow. No. Eliza screamed. She rolled still, protecting Anna, and then raised Francis's pistol with both hands and fired. The bullet hit Davenport in the thigh. He howled and fell from his horse. But then from the darkness, more riders appeared, Davenport's reserve force, 5 men who had been held back. They surrounded the clearing, guns drawn. "Drop your weapons," one of them commanded. "All of you, now." Winema Hale and the 2 farmers who had come with them slowly lowered their rifles. They were outnumbered, outgunned. Davenport, clutching his bleeding leg, laughed a wet, ugly sound. "Did you really think you could win? I own this territory. I own the law here." Eliza knelt beside Chask, pressing her hands to his bleeding shoulder. He was conscious, but fading fast, his face gray. "It's over," Davenport said, hauling himself upright with a grimace. "Give me the ledger, and I might let the rest of you live." Eliza looked down at Chasky. His eyes met hers, and even through the pain, she saw determination there. "Don't give up," his gaze said. "Not yet." Then from the darkness down the rail grade came new voices. "Federal Marshal, everyone stay where you are." Lanterns appeared, at least a dozen of them. Marshal Vincenzo Blake rode at the head of a column of deputy marshals, all heavily armed. They had been patrolling near the junction after receiving a partial relay the previous afternoon, making their swift arrival plausible. Eliza's message had gotten through. The marshal had received enough of it to understand the urgency. They had been patrolling near the junction after receiving a partial relay the previous afternoon, making their swift arrival plausible. And he had come. Davenport's men, seeing federal badges, dropped their weapons immediately. No local hired gun wanted to face hanging for shooting a federal officer. Blake dismounted and surveyed the scene, the burning shed, the bodies, the blood in the snow. His eyes fell on Davenport. "Sheriff Davenport," Blake said coldly, "you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and corruption. Deputy, secure him." Davenport snarled something incoherent, but he was quickly disarmed and bound. Blake's gaze moved to Francis, who lay in the snow nearby, barely breathing. "And Francis Connolly. Same charges." Then Blake looked at Eliza, still kneeling beside Chask. "Ma'am, are you Eliza Connolly?" "Yes," she whispered. "Your message got through. Not all of it, but enough." He glanced at the ledger clutched in her hand. "Is that the evidence?" "Yes." "Then you just saved your own life, ma'am, and caught 2 murderers." Dr. Hale rushed forward and began working on Chasky's shoulder, packing the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "He needs proper care. Now." Blake gestured to his men. "Get him on a horse. We ride for Dry River." They lifted Chasky as gently as they could. He was unconscious now, his breathing shallow. Eliza climbed onto the horse behind him, holding him upright, her arms wrapped around him, whispering, "Stay with me. Please stay with me." As they rode through the storm toward Dry River, Eliza looked back once. The shed was still burning flames, leaping into the night sky. The snow around it was trampled and stained with blood. But they had won. Against impossible odds, they had won. Chasky woke 3 days later in Dr. Hale's clinic in Dry River. The pain in his shoulder was a constant throb, but he was alive. The bullet had gone clean through missing bone and major vessels by inches. He turned his head and saw Eliza sleep in a chair beside his cot. Anna cradled in her arms. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes were still stained with his blood. As if sensing his gaze, she woke. Their eyes met. "You're awake," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank heaven." "How long?" 3 days. "You lost so much blood." She set Anna in a basket and moved to kneel beside the cot. "Dr. Hale said you shouldn't have survived, but you did." Chasky reached up with his good hand and touched her face. Because I had a reason to. She caught his hand and pressed it to her cheek, closing her eyes. You took a bullet for me. Seemed like the thing to do. Don't joke about it, she said fiercely. You almost died. But I didn't. He held her gaze. We made it, Eliza. Both of us. All of us. She nodded, unable to speak, and leaned down to press her forehead against his. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together, alive. Over the following days, the full story came out. Marshal Blake questioned everyone Christian Jules the Cooper, who confessed under oath that Davenport had paid him to prepare the barrel and help stage the accident. They had been patrolling near the junction after receiving a partial relay the previous afternoon, making their swift arrival plausible. Brave Ben and the other deputies, some of whom turned on Davenport to save themselves. Mabel Quinn and Cora, who testified about threats and violence. And Eliza, who told her story calmly and clearly, recounting what she had witnessed that day at the cooperage, watching her husband murdered and rolled into a barrel. The trial was held in Goldwater 3 weeks later. Proceedings were held before the U.S. Territorial Court at Goldwater, with a circuit judge presiding. The verdict, guilty on all counts. Proceedings were held before the U.S. Territorial Court at Goldwater, with a circuit judge presiding. Francis Connolly was sentenced to 20 years hard labor. Sheriff Marcus Davenport was sentenced to hang. The execution was carried out on a cold spring morning. Chaske did not attend, but Eliza did. She stood at the back of the crowd, holding Anna, and watched as the man who had killed her husband paid the price. When it was over, she turned and walked away, and with each step, the weight on her shoulders grew lighter. Spring came early that year. By late April, the snow had melted and the rivers ran high and the prairie turned green. The cottonwoods along Granite Pass were thick with new leaves. Chaske stood on a low rise, his left arm still in a sling, looking down at the half-built shelter near the old rail grade. Sod walls, a log roof, one room with a stone hearth. Small but solid. Eliza climbed the rise to join him, Anna on her hip. The baby was 4 months old now, healthy and bright-eyed. It's coming together, Eliza said. Slowly, Chaske agreed. But strong. She looked at him. Like us. He met her eyes, and something passed between them, understanding trust, something deeper. I want you to stay, Eliza said quietly. If you want to. Help me build this. Help me raise her. She looked down at Anna. I know it's asking a lot, but I'm asking. Chaske was silent for a moment. Then he said, I'm not going anywhere, Eliza. This is where I want to be. She smiled, truly smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. 2 months later, Dr. Hale brought a letter from Marshal Blake. They had been patrolling near the junction after receiving a partial relay the previous afternoon, making their swift arrival plausible. The court had restored Jack's claim to Anna with Eliza as guardian. The stolen funds, over $3,000, were recovered and held in trust. Eliza read the letter twice, then looked at Chaske. What should I do with the claim? What do you want to do? She thought for a long moment. Sell it. Use the money to expand Mabel's school. Give all the children a chance, native and white alike. Jack would have wanted that. Chaske smiled. Yes, he would. That evening they sat outside their shelter watching the sunset. Winema came by with the children. Cora brought seed potatoes. They ate together, laughed together, a makeshift family forged by survival. Later, after the others left Eliza, and Chaske sat side by side. Anna slept in her basket. Thank you, Eliza said quietly. For everything. Chaske wrapped his good arm around her. We kept each other alive. Together, she said. Together. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge. Behind them, winter was a memory. Ahead, the future stretched uncertain but full of possibility. They would face it side by side, partners in survival, in loss, in hope, building something real with their own hands. And that was enough.